There are things in this world that watch over us. And there are things in this world that just watch us. The problem is, you never really know which one you're dealing with until it's too late. Sometimes nature picks up on something before you do. Animals go still, changes in the energy in the air, or something shifting. Whatever it is, it's telling you to pay attention. But then, there are the other things. The ones that have been there your whole life. Standing in doorways, sitting at the foot of your bed, showing up right before something goes wrong. Are they protecting you? Are they drawn to your pain? Today's stories may offer more questions than answers. Whatever was watching these people, whatever kept them alive, it wasn't something they could explain. Honestly, I'm not sure if they'd want to. If we have guardian angels, do we also have guardian devils? Stick around, and remember to leave a rating, drop a comment, and hit follow so you never miss an episode of Scary But True. Let's begin. I'm your host, Michael Messerly, and this is Scary But True. I grew up in a densely forested rural area in central Virginia, and like most kids my age, 10 at the time of this story, I spent a lot of time playing in and around the woods. My best friend and I found a creek one day while exploring different deer trails through the woods. This creek we happened on was a very rare find and the perfect spot for us to play. It was wide and deep enough to swim around in and had nice soft mossy banks on either side to rest on after we tired ourselves out. The water was cool and clear, no copperheads, and no mosquitoes because the water was constantly running. We were psyched. After a few hours of swimming, we had to walk back home for lunch, but made plans to pack lunch the next day so we could have a picnic on the creek banks and spend the whole day there. The next morning, we set out for the woods at around 1 p.m., planning to have the picnic first and swim after. We entered at the same spot we had the previous day and followed what we thought was the same deer trail. It was not. At the point where we should have found the creek, we walked into a small clearing that was covered in huge, thick ferns. We had definitely never walked past this before, so being both hungry and tired of walking, we decided to eat in the clearing. We laughed and played around there for a while, spitting watermelon seeds at each other from our lunch. It was an absolute blast, and we were both in wonderful, giddy moods. That all changed, however, as soon as we packed up and set back out to find the creek. As we walked on, the woods started to feel darker and colder. We got skittish, and I noticed my friend kept whipping her head around to look behind us. After about an hour of walking, we came up on what looked like an entire overgrown bathroom. Sink, toilet, and bathtub all sitting arranged together and covered in ivy. It's pretty common to find weird shit like this in the middle of the woods, so we just walked on and made jokes to lighten the mood, calling it Bigfoot's bathroom. After another hour of walking and not seeing anything we recognized, we started to panic. Instead of trying to reach the creek, we were now just trying to find our way back home, or out of the woods, at least. I told her we should follow the sun and eventually we would come up on a road or someone's property where we could find help. She insisted on another way, and we began yelling at each other out of fear and, let's be honest, little girl bossiness. I told her if she thought she was so right, she should just go her way and we would see who got out first, so we split up. Now, as an adult, I fully acknowledge I was being a stubborn brat and also an idiot. Worst possible thing we could have done. Not 10 minutes after splitting up, I began to hear someone walking, maybe 100 feet behind me. Thinking it was my friend, deciding to go my way after all, I slowed down so she could catch up to me. Instead, whatever it was matched my pace. I slow down, it slows down. I stop, it stops. This went on for hours. The whole time I was going back and forth on whether or not it was in my head or there really was something following me. I picked up a big stick, swung it a few times to make sure it was sturdy if I had to hit someone, and trucked on. As it began to get dark, I came up on something that made my heart sink into my stomach. It was Bigfoot's bathroom. I had just walked in a huge circle for hours, despite being 100% sure I was following the setting sun west the entire time. Confused and frustrated, I sat down on a log and just screamed my little heart out for a while smacking my whoop-ass stick repeatedly into the ground. As I tried to collect myself, I heard the footsteps again, walking up on me from behind. I called out my friend's name as loud as I could. No answer. Then, after a short pause, the steps began to run towards me. I jumped up and booked it as fast as I could in the opposite direction. Now, this is the truly horrifying part, which I typically omit while telling people this story. As I was sprinting through the darkening woods, I began to hear what I thought were church bells. I looked up to see the darkest, deepest cloud I have ever seen in my life. In the middle, it was so black, it was like looking into the night sky, and the dark gray around it seemed to be swirling. It gave me a horrible feeling to look at, almost like the nausea you get when looking through binoculars for too long. What sickened me further is that I realized the sound of the bells was coming through the hole in the cloud. They were deafeningly loud, I mean really booming out of this thing. When I realized this, I stopped dead in my tracks. I felt a sense of absolute and overwhelming dread that has gone unmatched in all my 24 years on this planet. Something in my head began screaming that if I did not run away from whatever the hell that cloud was, no one would ever see me again. I would be gone. I did not want to run toward the thing chasing behind me either though, so I made a sharp right and took off away from both. It was now completely dark, and I was running blind through the woods, smacking through branches, wheezing, and tripping every few feet for what seemed like another hour, until I smacked into something low and flew over it, hitting the ground so hard all the air in my lungs was knocked out of me. As I lay there trying to recover, I realized I couldn't hear the bells anymore. Then my eyes adjusted more to the dark, and I realized what had just made me go ass over teeth was an old fence. Grabbing hold of it, I prayed it would lead me to a farm, and sure enough, it did. I walked up over a hill about a mile to the back of the farmhouse, explained what had happened, and the farmer graciously gave me a ride back home. I was covered head to toe in scrapes, oozing blood, and more exhausted than I had ever been in my life, but I was finally safe. It was past 9 p.m. when I finally walked through my front door. My friend had gotten back shortly after we split and figured I had as well, so hadn't told anybody I was lost, and my family just figured I was still out after dark, which wasn't uncommon for me. They were shocked when I walked in beat up and crying. Nobody had been looking for me at all. To this day, I wonder how long they would have waited to come to find me if I hadn't been lucky enough to find the fence, and if it would have been too late. I grew up in the South. Tons and tons of beautiful places to see that haven't been taken over by concrete yet. It's nice. But along with that, it's pretty boring. Being a teenager and wanting to go out and have fun led to mostly improvising with your buddies and hoping something good will come out of the night. There wasn't really a local spot to go hang out, like a club or cool bar, and the places that were close to this was boring because you did them so many times. I'm sure if you've ever lived in a rural area, you can understand that feeling completely. Something I found a ton of enjoyment in as a teen was just cruising around super late at night, listening to music. I would fill my gas tank up, grab something to drink on, a cigarillo, and I would just take off driving until the sun came up. It was a way for me just to clear my mind and relax. Those country back roads were always fun to drive down at 2 a.m. and was also just the right amount of spooky. Well, one night, I got absolutely more than I bargained for. I can't remember what month it was exactly, but I know for a fact that it was in summertime because I was out of school, and I also remember it being a comfortable, chill night. If I was to guess, it had just been around July or August. I was cruising around like I always did and was completely worry-free. I had music blaring and I was in my zone. I decided to head down to a park just out of boredom. This particular park is at the end of a very long stretch of desolate country road, but it's a really pretty drive because of that. When I say desolate country road, I don't mean that it's some dirt road that goes through the woods or anything like that. It's a normal paved road, but there's really nothing on it after a certain point. The entire road takes about 20 minutes to drive down to get to the park, and about 10 minutes into the drive, the houses start to get spread out further and further, to becoming no houses and just road leading into the park. I think a lot of the reason I like this drive at night is because of how creepy it was, and I looked at it as some sort of adventure or whatever. The park isn't open for camping or anything. It's mostly just a lot of land with walking trails and biking trails set up through miles of woods. So obviously, at around 3 a.m., it's pretty dead. I made it there and did a slow, normal little loop around the drive of the park. The night before it stormed very badly, so bad that I remember my parents and I had to take shelter because of the threat of a tornado. There ended up being no tornado, but the storms were pretty damn rough. Because of this, I came up on a fallen tree in the road that looped around to the exit of the park that must have happened because of the storm. It wasn't some massive tree or anything, but I know for a fact that there was no way I could have gotten over it or around it in my car. It was pitch black everywhere besides the front of my car because of my headlights. I immediately ruled out backing up the entire way. I just drove when I entered the park. I knew that was super dangerous and there was no way. At this spot on the road, there was flat land on each side of me. I figured that it would make the most sense to back up in the grass beside me just a little and then drive back the way I came. It was a one-way loop around the park, but I wasn't really worried about going out the wrong way since it was so late. I started to back up off the road so I could get my car turned around. All was good until I went to pull back up on the road. I totally didn't take into account how wet the grass was and the amount of mud. My car went absolutely nowhere. My back tires were completely stuck and were spinning in place as I was trying to floor the gas pedal. I started to become pretty scared at this point. Not the most ideal situation to be in. I immediately take my cell phone out of my pocket and saw that I had service. Super huge feeling of relief. I called my parents and told them what happened and where I was. They were pretty pissed at me, but said they would pay for a tow truck to come get me out. My parents both drove small 4-door sedans and they would have been zero help in the situation. I was about 45 minutes away from my house and the rest of most human civilization. So I realized that I would be stuck out here for at least an hour before someone was able to get me. freaky feeling, but I tried getting out of my head and just continued to listen to music and be on my phone in the car while I waited. Not really much more I could do. After I calmed down from the initial anger I had, I started to check out my surroundings. I didn't even notice at first because of everything going on, but in front of my car's placement was a field that was full of the most amount of deer I've ever seen at once. There legitimately must have been 40 deer in this field just walking around and eating the grass. The field wasn't directly in front of my car, but if I was to get out and throw a rock in that direction, I would have easily been able to hit one of them. If I were to guess, they were about 30 yards out. This didn't really help with the creepy level going on. Looking out in front of your car and seeing 80 eye reflections staring back at you is a bit of an alarming feeling overall, but I was relieved that it was just a field of deer. I watched them for a little bit, but I was quickly over it and started to browse through my social media apps while waiting. They seemed to have been over it quicker than I was because they all went back to walking around and eating once they figured out I wasn't going to attack them or anything. After browsing my phone for about 15 minutes, I finally get a call back from my parents letting me know that a tow truck guy is on the way in about an hour and a half from my location. Still, to this day, I remember hearing that and having the thought, "You've gotta be freaking kidding me." I understood that me and only me was the reason I was in this situation. I couldn't really be mad at anyone else, but that was very obviously not what I wanted to hear. I decided that the smartest thing for me to do was just make sure my doors were locked, lay in my back seat, and take a nap to pass the time. So that's what I did. I wake up 45 minutes later to the feeling of being watched. I'm not sure if anyone has ever experienced that feeling before. I don't know how common it is. But there was a sixth sense alarm going off in my head telling me that I need to wake up. Waking up to that feeling in this situation I was in was probably the worst case scenario. I sit up and immediately check my surroundings and see nothing. I looked through my car for any sort of weapon and found a pocket knife. I was very scared. Even though I saw and heard absolutely nothing, that feeling is terrifying. I was shocked to see that the field full of deer in front of me was still full of deer. I don't know anything about the animal, but I guess I always assumed they don't just hang out in the same place for long. I called my parents back to see if they had heard any kind of update from the tow truck dude. I decided not to mention the feeling I was having because I didn't want them to worry, and I also knew that it was literally nothing more than a feeling. No update from the tow truck, so we assumed everything was still the same on his end. The call lasted just a few minutes because I felt like such an ass. They both had to wake up for work in a few hours, now have to spend a random $100 plus, and on top of that, all they were worried about was me. I could tell they were annoyed at the situation, but worried. I said that I'll let them know when the guy gets here, and I'm sorry. I hung up the phone and looked up, and immediately my panic went from 0 to 100. The deer in front of me were all completely perked up, staring in the same direction to the right of them. Let me remind you that there are around 40 deer in this field. Every single one of them were stopped dead in their tracks, standing completely still, looking at something. I put my high beams on and stared, waiting for absolutely anything to happen. Nothing. I tapped my horn real quick. They didn't even budge or look my way. They were still completely glued to what was by them. The way the tree line was, I couldn't see that far over in the field. I know they were looking into the woods by them, but by where I was only able to see them. I could hear my heartbeat. I grabbed that stupid pocket knife and just waited for something to happen. About a minute after I honked, every single one of them in unison started to run the opposite way. They were running at full speed, and within 20 seconds the field was completely empty. I was petrified. I knew that staying in my car is what would be the safest thing to do. But it's the worst feeling in the world when you feel like a sitting duck. My head was on a swivel. I was freaking out. I assumed it was a bear or something, but it could have been absolutely anything. I was convinced at that point that it was the devil himself. I didn't know what to do. I knew that the tow truck was close by, but I had no idea where he was. I began to shake because of the nerves and just looked around to make sure nothing was by me and focusing on the field in front of me. I did this for what felt like an actual eternity, sitting in complete silence and darkness in the middle of nowhere, waiting for something to jump out and attack you. 15 of the longest minutes of my life go by, and I start to see lights break through the tree line on the road. As it gets closer, I see it's the tow truck guy. The lights on his truck felt like it was Jesus coming from heaven to rescue me. He gets up to me and I jump out of my car and immediately ask him if he's got a gun on him. I told him very quickly what just happened and that something is definitely out here nearby. He let me know that he had a shotgun in the truck and assured me that it was most likely a bear or bobcat. He gave me the whole "they're more scared of you than you are of them" bullcrap. The tree was small enough for him to sort of bulldoze it out of the way with his truck, and then he attached my car to his, pulled me out of the spot I was stuck in. He was very nonchalant about what I had just experienced, but I was pretty shaken up from it. The whole time he was doing his thing, I still had my eyes glued out in that field waiting for something. He was completely done with everything in about 15 minutes and told me to follow his truck out of here onto the main road again. I got in my car and was ready more than anything to get the hell out of this park. We started to drive away from the spot I was in, and I still had my head on a swivel, completely shook up. As we were driving away, I looked in my rearview mirror. We were down the park road just a tiny bit, and I could still see the spot I was stuck in partially lit up from the vehicle's lights and the moon. I watched in my rearview mirror a man come out of the tree line behind where my car was and walk into the middle of the road and watch us drive away. My heart stopped beating. I lost my breath and my eyes started to get full of tears because of how absolutely terrified I was in this moment. I couldn't see any details like what he looked like or even necessarily what he was wearing. To be honest, I don't really care. The feeling that I felt driving away from that spot, knowing he was right there the whole time watching me as I was freaking out, looking around, watching me as I was completely alone for a long time, maybe even coming up to my window and watching me as I slept. That's a feeling that is something I can't necessarily put into words. All these years later, and it still messes with me quite a bit. The entire time we were driving off, as long as I could see him, he didn't move. Just watched us in the road. A million things went through my mind. I was scared there may have been multiple people up the road waiting for us. I was trying to figure out if I should start beating on my horn like crazy to get the tow truck guy to stop or not. I decided that all I wanted to do was get out of there, more than anything. The second that we finally got out of the park and was able to be on the 2-lane road again, I flew past the tow truck driver and I did nothing below 70 the entire time home. I flew through the stop signs and stoplights. I did not care. The only thing on my mind was making it home. I got home, ran inside, quickly acknowledged my parents and said sorry and thank you, and went to my room. I didn't get a single second of sleep for the rest of the night. I was searching for any sorts of records of things happening in that area, escaped convicts, similar stories, etc. I came to the conclusion that the man was some sort of squatter or homeless. I read many things online on how it's common for homeless in rural areas to build shelter in the woods, which does make sense to me entirely on why they would do that, but obviously the unknown is the scariest part of it all. What if he wasn't homeless? What if he was gonna hurt me? What if? There's so many possibilities of what could have happened, but the outcome that did happen is what I'm most grateful for. I never told my parents this story until many years after it happened, and I was already an adult and moved out. It freaked them out too when I told them. I never went back to that park, ever. Even though I no longer live by there, I still have no desire at all to ever go back. I don't think I could even in broad daylight with a ton of people around. I also made the decision to stop doing those late night cruises. I did a few after that time with people, but even then, I felt very uncomfortable and on edge. This next story contains themes of abuse and trauma. Listener discretion is advised. I wanted to share my story with you. I've held on to it for so long. I don't want it to just be mine any longer. I think I'm finally ready to tell someone about Tommy, the bad thing, the little girl, all of it. For the sake of the story and remaining anonymous, my name is Jen. Everything I'm about to share with you is exactly the way I remember it. You can believe it or not, but it's all the truth. Nothing is embellished or fabricated. I will start at the very beginning. In 2001, I was 3. I was only a child at that point. My parents and I lived in this rent house my mom still lovingly refers to as the shack. The shack burned down only months after we moved, but it was a good house as far as I remember. It was old and small, but it was where I spent my first 5 years, the good years, before shit hit the fan. It had a concrete slab of a front porch where I'd draw with sidewalk chalk. It had a living room with a heater I'd use to warm my toes in the morning before preschool. There was a ledge on the bathtub where I'd stand to brush my teeth. The single bedroom had been walled off partially to make my room big enough for a twin bed and a bookshelf. I had a dinosaur blanket. I was really into dinosaurs back then. I don't remember much, just little details like I shared with you. I remember my mom and my dad, and I remember the others. The others couldn't be seen by anyone except for me. I would catch a glimpse out of the corner of my eye. They were always turning around a corner, ducking behind the couch. They acted like they didn't want to be seen, except for Tommy. He was different. He was a middle-aged man with a dark blue suit and brown hair and a kind smile. Tommy had the nicest smile that would wash away any bad thought or feeling I'd have. He was good. He was always a good one. He wasn't there all the time, but I saw him and played with him enough for my family to become acquainted with the idea of him. He was my imaginary friend. I was a lonely, only child. I had made a friend of my own to play with. Nothing out of the ordinary, except I did have a friend, a real friend. One that was alive and in the flesh. For the sake of this story, I'll call him Daniel. It was around 2003. Daniel lived next door. Between our houses was a field of tall grass with a path down the middle. We lived in the middle of nowhere in the shack, so our parents would have to walk us over when we wanted to play. I remember the last time Daniel played at my house, and shortly after, he stopped playing with me altogether. We were in my small bedroom, playing with Lincoln logs on the floor. Remember the ones you could fit together to build log cabins? Anyway, Daniel was lying on his stomach, and Tommy brushed his leg when he was trying to come into my room. Daniel looked up at him with fear in his eyes. I wasn't sure why. Tommy was a friend. He wasn't anyone to be afraid of. I told him, "Scoot over, Daniel, so Tommy can play too." Daniel screamed and ran out to the front yard, demanding to be taken home. My parents laughed when they heard the story and said I must have freaked him out by talking about my imaginary friend. I stood in the doorway with Tommy behind me. Daniel stared at the door, but not at me. I watched as his eyes were fixed well above my head. One thing was certain that day. I was now not the only one who had seen Tommy. At the end of '03, my parents told me I was going to be a big sister. I was so excited. They also told me we would have to move, and they had already found a new house for us. This house barely holds the three of us as it is, my mom had told me. There's no room for a baby, too. A couple months later, they closed on a house in the small town nearby. It was less of a town and more of a community. One main road, a couple hundred houses, a tiny school, and 2 churches. There was one amazing thing though. My best friend from T-ball happened to live right next door. Maddie, which is not her real name, and I had hit it off the year before, and so did our moms. I believe Maddie's mom was the one who told mine about the house being available. We moved in, and I was having the time of my life living next to my best friend. We would both be at each other's houses daily. We were also in the same kindergarten class. Side note, our houses were only about 50 feet from each other. They had been on the same plot of land that was later split. That will be important later. I had been a little worried about moving because I didn't want to lose my friend Tommy. Sure, he made Daniel run for the hills, and I was the only one who could see him most of the time, but I didn't want to move houses and never see him again. My parents had only said the 3 of us were moving. They hadn't said anything about bringing Tommy with us. And when I asked, they laughed it off. When I told Tommy this, he just smiled and placed his hand over mine, as if to say, I'm not going anywhere. The new house was strange. You could feel it from the yard. It's like when the AC is on, and you can feel it from the crack around the door. Except it wasn't cold air, exactly. It was just bad, though it did make you shiver. Maddie's house was the same. We talked about this just the other day, and there are 3 entities we can specifically remember between our 2 houses. One thing I liked about Maddie was that she saw them all like I did. I felt way less alone. To this day, she's still one of my best friends, and we still talk about how bizarre our childhood was in those 2 houses. One entity was the little girl. The little girl mostly stayed in my house. She never wanted to play and always seemed sad. When Maddie and I played in the yard, we would see her watching us from the window and beckon for her to come out. She always just shook her head and put back the curtains. She never spoke. She was harmless though, but she was as scared as we were of the Twisty Man. The Twisty Man, we believe, was attached to the greater plot of land that our houses sat on. He was seen in both houses. The Twisty Man is hard to describe. I think of a Dementor in Harry Potter. It sounds stupid, but it would take away all the happiness and you'd only feel fear. He was all twisted and contorted, and a couple times would look like he was caught in the ceiling fan swirling around on the ceiling above our beds. He was the color of a fresh bruise, blue and black and nasty looking. He didn't have a face, only a twisted silhouette. He never spoke. Just stayed long enough to nearly give us a heart attack. Whenever I saw him, it was never long before I saw Tommy too. He would stand in front of it, holding my gaze until it went away, staring at this man I'd known for as long as I could remember. The happiness came back, the fear melted, and the bad thing sank back into the walls. My sister saw the Twisty Man as a toddler, but Maddie and I saw him several times, both together and apart. I had honestly all but forgotten him until Maddie told me what happened about a month ago. Maddie's ex-stepbrother lives in her old house now. Her stepdad and mom divorced and he got the house years ago, but has since given it to his son. Maddie's mom got a call from her ex and thought it was weird. They're civil, but not friends who call to chat. This information comes from Maddie, whose mom called her right away. The ex called Maddie's mom and asked, what was that thing Maddie said she used to see in the house? The thing that she was scared of? Maddie's mom said, you mean the thing that she called the Twisty Man? And he said, I thought so. Apparently, the ex-stepbrother noticed that the neighbor who lives in my old house is sleeping in the driveway in a camper van. He thought it was weird that a 40-something-year-old single guy wouldn't sleep in a house he is paying a mortgage on, so he asked him why he was staying outside. The man told him, I don't even know how to say this, but there's something in that house. It's black and blue and all twisted up, and it watches me sleep. It takes away any happiness I have. I'm terrified. I'm not going back in there. This is a grown man claiming to see what we saw 20 years ago, not knowing our story. The third thing was less something we saw and more something that was just there. It would move things, knock things over, flush the toilets, turn on faucets, mess with electronics, etc. More of a nuisance than anything. One time Maddie was sleeping over at my house and she told me to quit tugging the blanket down. I told her I wasn't and to leave the blanket alone. We both felt a few more tugs before it flew off the end of the bed to the opposite wall. Things like this happened often. The worst thing that was in that house was not an entity. It was very much alive. It was my father. I was 6 by this time, and he was heavy into his many addictions. I can remember a time when he was good, but by this point, he was my worst nightmare. He and his friends. I'll spare you the details, partially because I don't even remember it all, though I'm not too upset about that. But I do remember one time, he had a couple of friends over and they were very far past the point of rational thought. I knew they were looking for me, and I also knew that them finding me was the last thing I wanted. There was a room in that house that I wasn't allowed in. It was less of a room and more of a boarded-in back porch, but it was where the laundry was. I asked my mom recently and she said I wasn't allowed because it wasn't safe. That house was falling apart even then. That room was connected to the bathroom by a built-in cabinet that had a hole in the back of the bottom behind the doors, so you could put a laundry basket in the bottom cabinet and then reach through the laundry room to grab it. That part was cool, actually. I remember seeing the little girl holding her hand out to me. I saw Tommy behind her, and he nodded to me, so I let her lead me through the hole and into that room. I would have never gone on my own. I was not a rule breaker by any means. She showed me a loose board, and I was able to push it out enough to slip behind it. I could hear them calling for me, but she put her finger to her lips to signal for me to be quiet. We stayed in that hole for a long time. I don't remember what happened next or how I got out, just that she never left me. I honestly don't know what would have happened if she hadn't helped me hide. I didn't even know that loose board was there, and neither did anyone else, I guess. They eventually got bored and went to hang out in my dad's truck until my mom and sister got home. More happened that I won't go into, but my sister, mom, and I moved in with my grandparents when I was 7. This would have been 05 to 06, I'm not sure exactly. My dad had supervised visitation, which he quickly lost. Things were good at Grandma's. I felt safe and stable. I didn't see anything here. I did miss Tommy though. About a year later, the summer before I went into 3rd grade, my mom remarried. The guy had a daughter 1 year older than me. My sister was 3. We moved a couple hours away to another community, even smaller and more rural than the first. I only lived in that house for the fall semester. They figured out pretty quickly their marriage was a rebound for them both and they would be better off apart. So I moved back in with Grandma at Christmas, since my mom was moving back in the summer anyway, and I missed my old school so much. She had to stick it out until June though, being a teacher in a contract. While we were living there though, I felt like Karen from the Babysitters Club. I had my very own morbid destiny. My friends from the street, Gravelback Road, and I were convinced our neighbor was a witch. Looking back, I doubt it. She had a grave in her backyard, but I'm sure it was a pet or something. We thought it was her husband. I saw Tommy a lot living here. I think he knew I needed a friend. I remember one day we had a babysitter. We heard footsteps, like always, and she looked a little freaked out. I told her, "Don't worry, that's just Tommy. He keeps the bad things away." After that, we played in the yard until my mom got home. I was scolded for scaring the babysitter. We were back with Grandma through the summer until my mom met guy number 3. He was good when he was sober. The first time I knew he was bad was the first time I saw Tommy at the apartment we were now living in. He had been hitting the bottle all day, and the day ended with him breaking my mom's cell phone, screaming at us, and not letting us leave. I was begging her to let me walk to the gas station across the street and call my grandma to come pick us up. "Please," I had told her. "You know Grandma would let us stay again." I think at that point, she was just so broken and embarrassed. She wanted to stick it out and hope it got better. And it did. In the morning, when he sobered up. But that seemed to be a trend for the next 6 years. That night, Tommy sat at the foot of my bed, between me and the door, while they screamed at each other. Again, he held my gaze. I don't know how long I stared into his brown eyes before I finally fell asleep. In 2009, we moved into the brick house. The brick house was where I spent most of my childhood. It's hard because I have so many good memories of the brick house, but it is also where I spent my darkest nights. That house came with entities of its own. There were the whisper people who lived in my sister's room, and the bad thing, and the stepdad. The stepdad, like I said, was good most of the time, especially in the early days. We would have nights where we knew to keep our distance because he had been drinking the brown bag juice, but he was a decent guy. It did seem, though, that the worse he got, the more active the bad thing was. I'll bring it back to the whisper people. My sister refused to sleep in her room. Our hallway was shaped like a backwards 7 coming off the living room. At the top of the 7 was the bathroom. Perpendicular to that door was my mom's room. Then, beside the bathroom on the small line of the 7 was my room, initially. And on the tip of the top line of the 7 was my sister's. So her door faced my mom's. I hated standing in the small line of the 7. I always had a bad feeling. You could also see it from the bathroom mirror. I only made that mistake once. After that, I would not look in the mirror until the door was completely closed. Anyway, my sister would not sleep in her room. She always said the whisper people were too loud. She was in pre-K kindergarten when we first moved there. She claimed she couldn't sleep because they whispered too loud. One day, I was coming out of the bathroom. I had just exited the door when I stopped because I thought I heard something from her room. My mom's door was to my direct right, and about 6 to 7 feet to my left was hers. The noise stopped abruptly, and I thought it was weird. I waited a few seconds before I heard, directly in my left ear, an older lady's voice say, "Shh, she'll hear you." I booked it. I don't think I've ever run so fast. It sounded like I was wearing an earbud. It was that close. I heard them a few other times, but I didn't ever stick around long enough to have them notice me again. Just ignore it became a trend in that house. A trend, a motto, a philosophy, whatever you want to call it. We just ignored it. Remember how I was talking about the bathroom mirror? Well, one day I was brushing my teeth and I made the mistake of looking up. When I did, I saw a shadow, except it wasn't on the wall where a shadow should be. It was like a void in the middle of the hall, standing where a person would be. It was a shadow, but three-dimensional, just standing there. It didn't have eyes that I could see, but I could feel it staring at me. This is what I called the bad thing. The bad thing was much more powerful than anything I had ever experienced. My mom coined it the hallway walker because she said she could hear it pacing the hallway at night. I quickly moved out to the renovated garage as my bedroom. We had walled it in, added a window, added insulation and drywall. It was like any other room in the house, and it was huge. It was a kid's dream space. It was also generally free of the entities. For some reason, they stayed at the other end of the house. I was grateful for this. The bad thing had this ability to play back our voices. I remember sitting in the living room with my mom and being the only ones home. We heard my voice from her bedroom saying, "Mommy, come here." We both looked at each other, and she shook her head. Behind her, you'll never guess who was standing there. Tommy. He did the same as her. He shook his head back and forth, slowly. "Mommy," we heard. "I need you." Our show was paused, and we sat in complete silence. I watched Tommy walk down the hall toward her bedroom. We heard it a third time. "Mommy, I need..." And then it stopped. I don't know what Tommy did, but he stopped it. We felt the air shift and both took a deep breath. "Do you think it's gone?" I asked her. "For now," she told me. And she was right. It was gone, but it always came back. This is just one example. We heard our own and each other's voices all the time. I was constantly keeping tabs on where everyone was in the house. I don't want to know what would have happened if I listened and followed it somewhere alone. By the time I was a freshman in high school, 2012 to 2013, I spent my ride home from school praying that stepdad was already passed out in the recliner. It was a good night if he was. Sure, we had to tiptoe and keep to our rooms, but at least I didn't have to deal with him yelling, cussing, hitting things, etc. On the unlucky nights, we did have to endure his drunken stupors. It seemed that the bad thing would be more active. He'd show up around corners, talk more, move things, and generally cast a dark, heavy cloud over the house. Much like the Twisty Man, he had a talent for sucking all of the happiness out of an area. But on nights like these, Tommy would be there, always silently letting me know it would be okay. My other best friend, who later became my college roommate and godmother of my son, was over one night. Stepdad was God knows where doing God knows what, but it had been a good night. We'd rented movies, eaten more than our fill of pizza, and I'd spent the last couple hours talking about boys and gossip. She went to the bathroom, and when she came back, she seemed uneasy. I asked what was wrong. "Dude, what's up with your stepdad? Where did he go anyway?" I looked out the window of my room, which overlooked the driveway. His truck wasn't there. He's still gone," I told her. "No, I just saw some guy in your kitchen, and he was wearing a suit," she told me. She then went on to describe Tommy to a T. A few minutes later, we heard the front door bang open, and my stepdad stumbles in and throughout the house. He finally grumbled his way to his and my mom's bedroom and slammed the door. "That was him," I told her. "Then who the F did I just see in your kitchen?" she asked. I explained the whole thing to her, how Tommy had always been there to guard me and seemed to show up when I needed protection or comfort. "Oh, like an angel. Cool," was all she'd said. She went on to see him about 4 more times when we lived together. I also had 3 other friends who stayed over describing the man they saw sitting at the table, on the couch, and leaning against a doorway, all with the same description of a middle-aged man with brown hair and eyes and a dark blue suit. On the last night, I truly didn't know if I'd make it out of that house. We refer to it as the last night because it was the last night we had to see stepdad. I was 16 and I was done. The situation with him had hit a breaking point. What was once just him stomping around and being intimidating to assert his dominance had turned into something physical. Side note for anyone hearing this story, if you do share this, please don't stay just because it isn't physical. If they're acting like that, it will escalate at some point. Just because it's all been verbal until this point does not mean it won't absolutely change in the future. Get out before it does. On this night, the doors were all locked. He'd taken our phones. He was marching back and forth, spewing nonsense about how he demanded respect. I snuck my sister into my room and hid her in my closet. I barricaded the bedroom door. I put headphones on her and played her favorite songs on my iPod so she couldn't hear him banging and yelling at me to open up and come out. Part of me was so tired. Part of me wanted to just give him what he wanted. Part of me thought that even if the worst happened, I'd be finally free of this. I was so tired. I didn't want to be unalived, which I truly believe to this day that's how that night should have ended, but I just couldn't do it anymore. But then, I saw Tommy. He pointed to the drawer of my vanity. I hardly ever went in there. It had become my drunk drawer. "What?" I asked. He pointed again. I sighed and walked over to it, still hearing the banging and yelling on my door. Sitting there on top of my journals and old camp pen pal letters was my cell phone. The very cell phone that had been confiscated earlier in the night. To this day, I have no idea how it got in that drawer. It wasn't the first time things had seemed to teleport in that house, but it was the first time I was so grateful for the weird shit I'd experienced my whole life. I took it out and called my aunt. I don't know why, but she was the first one I thought of. She worked with law enforcement and I knew she would know what to do. She always did. She called the police on my uncle's phone and they were there within minutes. I brought my sister out of the closet so we could watch our stepdad finally be arrested for the 6 years of hell we'd gone through. I hugged her and looked over her shoulder to make eye contact with Tommy again. "Thank you," I told him. After it was just the three of us in the house, bills got to be a lot. My mom was a teacher, after all, which wasn't lucrative, even in 2015. I had a cousin who had just had a bad breakup and needed a fresh start. She lived about 15 hours away. She was 26 at the time. She and my mom decided that she would move in and help out with us girls and pay a small amount in rent, and it would be beneficial for everyone. So she came to live with us. She moved into the room that had been mine initially, beside the bathroom. I remember after a few weeks of her living there, she'd asked me, "Did you ever sleep with the door open when you stayed in my room?" I'd laughed and told her, "Hell no, why?" She'd asked me, "Did it stare at you all night too? The shadow thing?" Once stepdad left, the activity did die down a lot, but it was still prevalent. I remember one time I got home from school. My friend had dropped me off, and my cousin's car was in the driveway. I'd come inside and called out her name. I'd heard her voice say, "Back here," clear as day. I had something I'd wanted to tell her, so I'd practically sprinted to her room, only to find it empty. I thought maybe she was in my mom's room, the bathroom, my sister's room. I searched, but she was nowhere. I was annoyed because I thought she was hiding from me. I called her and she sounded confused. "I'm at the grocery store with your mom. What are you on about? We'll be home in like 20 minutes. We're about to check out." I'd heard her voice call to me, but she wasn't there. Whatever had used her voice had gotten me in the house alone. I felt the air grow cold and ran into the front yard, passing Tommy on the way. He was passing me in the hall on his way to her room. I didn't even stay to see what was going to happen. I sat on the driveway until they got home. Things went on like this for the next year and a half. During this time, my cousin had moved in with her now wife, and my now dad had moved in. He is a fantastic guy. He adopted me a couple years ago. I may have been 24, married, and a mom, but it was important to me that he is my dad legally. He is in my heart anyway. We sold that house the summer before I went to college, and we all moved across the state. We all needed a fresh start. We needed out of that town that held so many horrible memories. We needed to be able to go in public without watching over our shoulders. So I chose where I wanted to go, and they moved too. They lived about 45 minutes from the university, which was nice. I was able to go see them on the weekends, but still have my independence. Having my independence and safety, though, turned out to be a curse as much as it was a blessing. Now that I was finally safe, my mind decided that I was in a place to process some of the trauma I'd experienced when I was younger. I started remembering things that had been pushed to the back of my mind and tucked away. I was waking up nightly, screaming. Every night, Tommy was at the foot of my bed, staring at me with his big brown soft eyes, until my breathing calmed and I could sleep again, even though that was the last thing I wanted to do. Having these night terrors invaded every aspect of my life. My grades fell, I wasn't doing the best at my job, and it had been weeks since I slept well. One of the last straws, when I was horsing around with a friend from our friend group. It was my best friend from before, another girl, two of our guy best friends, and myself all in our dorm. I'd taken something out from one of our guy friends as a joke and was dangling it around, teasing him. He was reaching for it, trying to get it back, and somehow I ended up pinned between him and a wall. He wasn't being violent at all, just playful. Something about that, though, set me off. I don't even remember what happened. I just remember coming to, crouched on the floor, and they were looking at me, very concerned. They told me I'd started crying, shouting nonsense, and hyperventilating. The next day, my best friend and the guy I'd been playing with brought me to the counseling center. It was then I started seeing a therapist. We talked through it. I started anxiety medication not long after, and life was good. I still had my nightmares, but they were getting further and further apart. Tommy was always there at night to sit on the foot of my bed and look at me until I fell back asleep. Just knowing he was there made me feel better. I saw him one more time while I was in college after the nightmares stopped. I was pumping gas at a gas station about a quarter mile from the university. It was the last building before a long bridge and then our school. I had just gotten back in my car when a guy around my age came up to my passenger window holding his student's ID. "Hey ma'am," he said to me. "I know this is weird, but I really need a ride back to school. My friends ditched me. I see your parking pass. Are you going back right now?" My window was down slightly because it was a nice night. It was down far enough for me to hear him, but not enough for him to reach inside. Honestly, he was kind of cute, and he seemed genuine. I was about to say yes when I made eye contact with someone in my back seat. It startled me. It was Tommy, and he was shaking his head at me. I turned back to the guy who was reaching for my passenger door handle. I felt a firm grip on my shoulder and made eye contact with Tommy one more time. He had a serious look on his face, and he was shaking his head even harder. I said, "No, sorry," and locked the doors. I sped away and could hear him shouting at me as I pulled out. I held my breath the whole way. I could feel the hand on my shoulder the whole time. When I put my car in park, I collapsed onto my steering wheel and sucked in a deep breath. My lungs were burning at that point. I felt the hand leave and look into my rearview mirror. The back seat was empty. I spent the next few years in what felt like a whirlwind. I moved cities, transferred schools, got engaged and married, and even had a baby. Tommy would show up randomly when I'd have nightmares and a couple of times when loved ones sadly passed. The night my uncle, who was one of my only positive male role models, so we were close, passed, my phone rang. It was my mom. I looked over and saw Tommy on the couch by me, looking at me sadly. He knew before I did, and he was there until my husband got home a few minutes later. Occasionally, Tommy would show up just to check on me, it seems. My husband had seen him a couple times and he was cool with it. He's had his own experiences with the paranormal and believed me right away. The first time he saw him was after a nightmare. I woke up to Tommy on the foot of my bed. A minute later, my husband jumped out of bed and said, "What the F?" Honestly, can't blame him. But I explained everything, and he took it surprisingly well, considering there was just a man in his bed. One day, we were in my car and I had to run into the store to grab a few things while he sat in the car keeping the heater on. And when I got out, he told me, "Hey, your friend came to visit." I must have looked confused because he said, "Your ghost friend, Tommy? He was in the back seat." I just said you weren't here right now. I also told him you were safe and thanks for taking care of you all those years. He kind of just stared at me for a minute and then went away. That was the last time either of us saw Tommy for a year or so. The next time, and the last time, was right after I had my son. He was maybe 2 or 3 weeks old at that point. I was walking into the nursery to check on him while he was napping, and I stopped short because standing over the crib was a man in a dark blue suit. He turned to look at me and looked like he had tears in his eyes. He looked between my son and me a couple times and gave me a smile. "He's cute, isn't he?" I asked. "You aren't leaving, are you? I mean, I still see you, right?" He just looked at me. "Thanks for keeping me safe," I told him. He looked back at my son and looked at me like how a parent looks at their child as they cross the graduation stage. He seemed proud of me, but he didn't answer. The look he gave me made my heart swell. Somewhere deep down, I knew that this would be the last time I saw his kind brown eyes. Then my son cried, and I tore my gaze away from the man who had kept me safe my whole childhood. When I looked back to the space where Tommy had been, he was gone. There have been times when I think maybe I made it all up. Maybe Tommy was my way of coping. Maybe he was part of decades-long psychosis or a trauma-induced apparition. But then I think of all the other people who saw him too. Maybe he really was there. Maybe he was an ancestor of mine. Maybe he was a guardian angel. All I know is, I don't think I'd be here today if it wasn't for my imaginary friend. I'm 26 now. I have 2 loving parents who are the best grandparents ever. I have a husband who I love more than anything, and an almost 3-year-old who keeps me on my toes. He's so smart and gives me the best hugs. He is growing into such a funny kid. I love being his mom. I haven't seen Tommy since that day, but sometimes I think I can feel a hand on my shoulder or eyes watching me the way he always would. Lately, my son has been smiling and waving at the dark hallway and talking to someone in his closet. He calls him Blue Man. He never seems afraid. Maybe it's an imaginary friend. Maybe he has his own guardian angel. Or maybe, just maybe, Tommy kept me safe as long as he could, and now he's watching over my baby. If it really is him, I know that he's in good hands. Thank you so much for listening. Please remember to leave a like, a comment, a rating, and shoot me a follow wherever you're listening. Also, feel free to send me your scary but true stories to scarybutTruePod@gmail.com. I appreciate every bit of support. Thank you again, and I will see you next time for more scary but true.